Hey everyone, I just played Let Bions Be Bygones, and it was so much. Developed by Bohemian Pulp, it's a cyberpunk point-and-click adventure mystery game that boasts over 1,000 important choices, and desperately wishes it was Disco Elysium. And I'm not saying that to be mean, it's a comparison Let Bions Be Bygones actively invites from its opening moments with this horrible necktie hanging from a ceiling fan. When I said as much to a friend of mine, he quipped, "Who wouldn't want to be Disco Elysium?" And you know what? I can't argue with that. I wish I could write something of Disco Elysium's quality too, so I won't begrudge Let Bions Be Bygones for aspiring to such lofty heights as well, but good grief does it not reach them. It comes so close in one or two ways in one or two moments. The world building and atmosphere are incredible, and the mystery is actually pretty intriguing, but then the characters open their mouths and...
Isn't that my favorite detective, Uncle Garney?
Oh, wow. I knew the second I took this psychic damage I was going to have to share it with the world. I need to get Let Bions Be Bygones out of my head, so let's talk about it. But before I get my hands into the guts of this game, there are going to be mild visual and audio spoilers throughout, and I'll throw up a timestamp to skip to whenever I get into story details, since it's best experienced yourself. There are going to be flashing lights throughout the video too. Also, I want to disclose right now that I got the game for free, the benefit of being even a teeny tiny channel I guess, so in the interest of burning that corporate bridge before it's even really been built, let's get to it. Let Bions Be Bygones is a familiar story to any fans of cyberpunk noir. A rich girl's gone missing on the wrong side of the tracks, and her even richer handlers have tasked a washed-up private detective with finding her before something terrible happens. At first glance, John Cooper might not be the best guy for the job. His glory days are obviously behind him, and he's content to pour what little money he does make down his throat through bottles of cheap rakia, while his landlord's goons kick down his door to serve him an eviction notice. But Let Bions Be Bygones actually plays with the grizzled old detective trope by making him the only guy for the job. In a world bursting at the seams with transhuman wonders of every kind, where nobody goes without some sort of augmentation, John Cooper is the exception. He's the last analog machine in a digital world, and that technological disconnection is what causes Lady Death to seek him out with a job offer. Cooper can go places augmented people can't, can learn things without having the information hacked right out of his head, and can move around beneath suspicion compared to the glamorous elite and their corporate attack dogs also searching for Lucy, the missing girl. What can I say? Cooper's a professional. He can handle himself, but how he handles this case in particular is up to you. What struck me most about Let Bions Be Bygones when I first played the game was its atmosphere. Cyberpunk has always been a genre built on vibes, and while Bohemian Pulp clearly didn't have the budget to replicate the smog-choked cityscape of Blade Runner, Let Bions Be Bygones is still able to capture the essence of it through careful use of lights and set dressing. The game features a three-dimensional world built of three-dimensional objects, but the people who inhabit it are 2D pixel sprites, all of which is bathed in the glow of a neon kaleidoscope. Not every area is well lit, but all the places you visit have their share of harsh fluorescent lights fighting to fill the shadows through the constant waves of smog. Skyscrapers loom out of the darkness. Holographic advertisements block your view. Headlights and bonfires cut through the gloom. It's such a mood. You don't get to see much of the game's setting, Terror Hive, but what few glimpses you are given create such a vivid impression of the place that it's easy to fill in the blanks beyond the borders of the game world. People wander the streets or sit back for a bite to eat or a beer. Flying cars zoom on by, and you can hear it too. The game goes to great lengths to create a believable soundscape, the cooking fires of a market, a party raging on the other side of a wall, a band playing in a sleepy pub. The game world might be small, the characters might not move all that much, but it's dense enough to make it feel huge and lived in. Take this guy having a break on the hood of his hovercar, or this guy using a concrete mixer as a cooking pot, or how unbothered both of them are by the three goons impaled on spikes right beside the market. When I first got to this area, I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't progress the story at all. I just sat back and took in the vibes. It was so far above what I was expecting from the game. I can't help but be impressed. It doesn't feel like TerraHive just popped into existence for the sake of the story like so many sci-fi or fantasy worlds do. The environments are built to match the world building and the layers of history written to accompany it. Let Bions Be Bygones mostly takes place in the Pit, a glorified cyber slum run by gangs and exploited by the rich and powerful uppers who live in great towers reaching high above the cloud line. There's also a third layer even lower than the Pit, the underworld, where the dead are dumped and in turn reanimated to be used as vessels for even stranger transhuman beings that are never really elaborated upon. The Pit has a thriving poverty tourism industry catering to curious rich folk who come down to see how the other half live and experience a few thrills before returning to the safety of the towers. A train station has been converted into a tourist trap overflowing with umbrella salesmen, bootleggers, sex workers and guides, and it's also the best place to start looking for Lucy. It seems like she ended up at Inferno, an exclusive club of violent delights run by the current rulers of the Pit, the Chenki twins. The Chenki twins are palers, blue-skinned transhumans whose blood doubles as server space for a sentient virus that a tech cult, now run by Cooper's old pal Zoe, wants access to for some reason. The palers previously went to war with the reanimated corpses of the underworld like Mali Savet, who refer to them as Azurites. As a result, most of them are dead, and the Chenki twins are only the latest in a long line of powerful gangs to rule the Pit. Not so long ago, the place was ruled with an iron fist by the Big Daddies, and many of the characters, including Cooper, talk about the gang wars that took place as their grip on the city collapsed. If anything, the Chenki twins seem to be an improvement, but they're still monsters. They still treat the Pit like it's trash. Vitki's so disdainful of the place he pisses on the streets below from the balcony of his penthouse suite at the top of Inferno, but powerful as they are, as high as they've risen, they're still beneath the uppers living rich and beautiful above the clouds. Death is everywhere, death is cheap, and if you've got the money you can have your mind jacked into a robot body, the Bions from the title, but if not, someone else will find a use for the meat anyway. Not everyone who looks monstrous is monstrous. Not everyone purely human is innocent and good. It's a shitty world to live in, but you still get to see glimpses of people making do and getting by and finding community in amongst all the misery. It may not be entirely original. Most of that brief description of the setting probably sounds familiar to you if you're a fan of Cyberpunk in particular or speculative fiction in general, but even if the elements aren't unique, the way they're combined absolutely is, and when you add on the game's presentation, it's perfect. The world is rich and dense and open to expansion, especially given so much is left unexplained and unexplored, or at least it was in my playthroughs. I would be happy to return to it. Let Bions Be Bygones wears its love for Disco Elysium on its sleeve, and in terms of atmosphere, in terms of world building, I think it does actually live up to that inspiration, even more so in the pre-release build that I was provided before launch. There used to be even more atmosphere in the Pit. There were neon lights featuring Chun-Li and Mario out the window of the Scray and the flats, and the places feel a little dimmer for their absence. I don't know why these little shoutouts were removed. Ultimately, I don't really mind, it's not that important, but I am surprised that they weren't replaced with anything. And I'm certainly saddened by the loss of the song the band at the Scray used to play before launch. The vibes in that little bar were so good I just stood there and listened to the whole thing before moving on. But if you go there now in the release build, there's just some ambient background noise instead. Maybe it was a licensing issue, I don't know. And again, its absence didn't ruin the experience of the game for me on a second playthrough, but I still do find it odd that nothing was put in its place. I think it speaks to how strong an atmosphere Let Bions Be Bygones has that such small edits stand out in my head. It was in those moments, when I just stood back and took in the world for a little bit, that the game was at its very best. When I first sat down to play Let Bions Be Bygones, I could not decide whether it was good. The quality swung like a pendulum to such unexpected extremes, but in these little quiet moments I always thought, you know what? This is actually pretty good. And then someone would open their mouth and I would burst out laughing. I'm going to word what I say next carefully because I don't want to be cruel, but this is not the vibe.
The silence screamed louder than any siren. Darkness gnawed at my eyes, harder than TerraHive's unrelenting neon blaze ever had. I might have some bad news for you.
What? Did she die? Is my Mila dead?
It's not that I enjoy having to charm this handsome man. Wink, wink.
Did you just say wink, wink?
Can't we take him to the golf course?
Damn, you're a chunky boy.
So stop acting like an entitled, self-proclaimed protagonist and take a look at the world like an actual human being.
Men. Can live with them, can shoot them execution style and dump their bodies in an empty parking lot.
Moat could even handle the 3 daddies, the 3 toughest gangs under the Big Daddy banner. No, she's fine. Except, sitting on 2 chairs, so to speak.
Someone cut her in half?
The game's voice acting is, at once, one of Let Bions Be Bygones' greatest strengths and one of its biggest weaknesses. There's a lot of it, and in a game with so much text and so much story and so many choices, over 1,000 so I'm told, it is impressive that there's so much voice work. Not only does it cut down on the eye strain from having to read so much text, it helps flesh out the characters through tone and intonation. The sprites don't emote all that much, but the voices add a lot of personality. There are some nitpicks I could focus on, like voice lines not matching up to the text.
And son, if you break another mug for emphasizing reasons, I might have to take some precautions. And let me tell you, you ain't gonna like them.
Or missing lines of dialogue, or mispronounced words.
Always wondered who came up with these Bonds mots.
Or the fact it seems like one character was written to be English, but the performance is obviously Americanized.
Damn. Our chances of finding her just went to shit, didn't they?
And I think it's important to point these things out, but they're not the crux of my issues with the voice acting. I don't think the voice actors are bad either. Only one of them stood out as being particularly stiff in delivery. It's the dialogue itself that gets me. Let Bions Be Bygones is a game that tries to punch above its weight in terms of writing, and while it can meet Disco Elysium on quality when it comes to world building, it's left in the dust on dialogue. There's a famous old story Mark Hamill likes to tell about his time on the original Star Wars, where the cast was reading through George Lucas's script and they couldn't believe how wooden the dialogue was. Quote, "You can write this stuff, but you can't say it," end quote. And that applies so very much to Let Bions Be Bygones. The game's voice cast do their absolute best with the material they're given, but I don't think there's any way you can pull off.
It was like watching a chess master, pondering a board where every piece was rigged to explode.
Without making the audience giggle just a bit. It's true to the writing style of noir, I won't deny that, but it comes off like an unintentional parody. So much of Cooper's internal monologue does.
That car was a symphony, and I was the crescendo.
And it only gets worse if you've got TT-8, the talking gun, and Cooper's lost Lenore Carmen with you. Disco Elysium's most impressive writing feat was having each of the player characters' thoughts and emotions and psychological issues comment on any given situation, and Let Bions Be Bygones tries to emulate that through these 2 characters. Carmen, being the personification of the last time Cooper remembers being happy, often tries to appeal to his better nature, but TT-8 talks like an out-of-control teen caught in the grips of puberty. It's nothing but sex and violence and so much swearing.
Oh yes, I'm thirsty, Daddy. I tolerate this only 'cause it's a threesome. You hear me?
Yeah, boy! Lube up that artery, Coops!
Easy, fuckface. This tense bitch. I can't even. I just pray we're not switching to some fantasy bullshit all of a sudden. And you may suck my bear barrel, asshole! Oh, yeah, Daddy! Drench me in red, Daddy! Oh, yes!
Now, if you've watched my videos before, you know I like to swear. I do it a lot, and people like that I do it a lot. But there's a fucking art to it, and this is not it. TT8 and Let Bions Be Bygones overall swears so much that even I thought it was over the top, and I completely understand why some people would be put off by that, because it is off-putting. It's immature and insensitive, and it's not even fucking necessary. I remember writing stories when I was 13, 14 years old, and every single one of my characters was swearing up a storm because I thought it was cool and adult and forbidden, when actually it was just cringeworthy, the same way it is here in Let Bions Be Bygones. When you just throw the words out with reckless abandon, they lose meaning, they lose impact, whether they're meant as a shock or as humour or for emphasis. It's too much of a good thing, and it doesn't help that TT8 is already very unfunny.
So what now? Did we just meander into the teenage romance genre?
There were a couple of times where the guns jokes hit the bullseye, like one instance where everyone in the conversation pauses for a few seconds, but instead of staying quiet with an ellipsis through the beat, TT8 says,
3 dots.
That was cute, that was fun, it got a giggle out of me. But then there was another point where TT8 just broke the fourth wall and suggested the player check their balls for lumps, or spent a scene doing an impression of the narrator from Baldur's Gate 3. I didn't run into the ball gag on this recorded playthrough, but I went out of my way to get the Baldur's Gate 3 impression because it's just so odd.
Yo, Goose! I'm gonna try something real quick. Don't mind me. Just do your thing. Ahem.
You try your best not to empty your bowels upon first contact with the hideous creature floating in the sparkly liquid.
The gun's dialogue is so all over the place in a way no other part of Let Bions Be Bygones is, and certainly no part of Disco Elysium was. To the game's credit, you aren't forced to take TT8 with you, or even Carmen with you. You can leave them both behind at the start of the game, so it is possible to avoid the cringe. And if you suffer from photosensitivity, I would anyway, because for some reason the gun flashes every time she speaks. Another odd decision. Kudos to the actor for trying her best, but holy hell, you can write this shit, but you cannot fucking say it. And that's the thing, everyone tries their best, and when the direction matches the level of writing, it works really well. The gopniks you meet in the market were especially fun.
What? Look at the little man, acting all swaggy.
Haha, yeah, look at him! Fuck off, little man!
John Cooper's voice fits the character and the performance works despite the writing.
Fortune favors the drunk detective. Said no one ever.
But there are some performances that really needed better direction.
I bet she would love to buy one of my newest umbrellas.
Mazo! Fuck your umbrellas, that girl might be dead.
This cuck is just begging for an umbrella. Up his ass!
He deserves this life.
Nothing wrong with a healthy sex life, Jim.
Agreed, just ask your mom.
There certainly needed to be less mouth sounds. And snorting. But the absolute worst of Let Bions Be Bygones voice acting is Mally Savette, a reanimated corpse acting as a guide for rich uppers in the pit. He pokes his way into the plot early on and then will not fuck off. He follows you across the entire game, and unlike with the talking gun, there's no option to avoid him. The amount of dialogue he has is honestly staggering, but maybe it just feels like a lot more than it is because, just fucking listen to him.
The fuck kind noise. My twit said he's.
You did? I mean, he did?
He did. Gave me a butt with some friends. He but this corner smelled really, really nice.
Let bygones be bygones? No. This is the Mally Civet Psychological Torture Tolerance Test Variety Hour. And the worst part is, I actually kind of grew to like him by the end of the game. Not for his voice, fucking hell, not for his voice, but the character was fine. I just can't comprehend what led to that performance. It's the kind of voice you do between friends, and it's funny for like 5 minutes, but then you get sick of it and never do it again. A few years back, some friends and I watched Rambo Last Blood, and that movie was so bad we started what we called Rambo posting just to entertain ourselves. Where we would talk like this, saying dumb shit and memes like my name Jeff. And it wore out its welcome so quickly, we've never done it again. We talk about it occasionally, joke about it, have a good old chuckle, but this is the first time any of us have done it since that day, and I'm ashamed I had to do it at all to prove this point. Now, could you imagine this whole video done with that voice? I'd have fun, but you'd die. Mally Civet is like that, for all 3 to 4 hours it takes to play through Let Byons Be Bygones. I'm sure it was fun to record, I'm sure the voice actor had a wonderful time. I don't even think it's a bad execution of an annoying as fuck Gollum wannabe, but for such a prominent character, this is inexcusable. Why was the voice direction like this? Admittedly, I don't think Let Byons Be Bygones was originally written in English, so it could be a translation issue, I don't know, but it stood out like a neon-clad skyscraper through the smog for me. Every time I think back to how perfect the game's atmosphere is, I'll always break out in a cold sweat at the knowledge Mally Civet is hiding just out of sight ready to start talking at me, which finally brings me to gameplay. When you hear the words point-and-click mystery, you might think of puzzles, or inventory management, or keeping track of information, but no, there's none of that here. You walk around, and you talk to people, and that's 90% of the gameplay. You walk around slowly too. Some of the dialogue drove me up the wall due to its content or delivery, but at least I could always skip it. You have no such option when walking around, and that's okay when you're in an interesting location like the market, or the metro station, or the flats. It's less acceptable when you're walking down one of Inferno's several empty hallways. Cooper's speed could definitely have been given a boost, though I believe there is a fast travel option too, so it's not exactly a deal breaker. Outside of dialogue, there's also a journal that I don't remember from the pre-release build, so it's possible that it was patched in later, though it's also possible I just didn't notice it. But either way, it's a bare-bones addition to the game. It does record everyone you meet, and it does track quests, be they active, completed, or failed, but they're kind of broken anyway, so it's not really fit for purpose. There's also a notes page to write down your own clues or observations, which is fun, but I discovered you can accidentally open the fast travel menu while typing, so it's not implemented very well. And the plot isn't really complicated or branching enough to need it anyway, which just leaves the mechanics of dialogue. A lot of conversations give you different choices after each step of the dialogue, and they can range from asking questions in a professional manner, getting friendly with an old acquaintance or stranger, being a belligerent dickhead, or cutting straight to the thirst. You don't have total freedom to create a unique identity. The options you're given are within the scope of John Cooper's pre-existing character, such as it is, but the choices you do make result in him adopting different personalities as the game goes on. If you're violent or horny, you'll get more violent and horny options. If you're more professional and analytical, you'll get to ask more questions pertaining to the case. So in that regard, Let Byons Be Bygones isn't lying when it says it has over 1,000 important choices. They all do build up over time, and they can change the trajectory of the game to some degree, but they ultimately don't amount to much. A lot of conversations change, you learn different things in different ways, but the main beats of the plot play out in the same order regardless of your choices. Even the choices you are given are poorly communicated to you as well. For example, commenting on Savica for being an pleasure bion leads to everyone present assuming Cooper wants to sleep with her, which is not indicated at all by the dialogue option. You do get to see blanked out options if you don't meet their requirements, but not why. You're just told personality underdeveloped, which is a savage burn if ever I've heard one. What's interesting is that you do get to see what the unavailable options would have been during the tutorial, and I wish that had been extended to the entire game, just to give you a sense of how you'd need to play Cooper differently in order to access them on a later playthrough. There are other points where the game makes choices for you depending on your playstyle, which it treats as dice checks, but it always felt more like a binary system of you already meet the requirements or you don't. Maybe it's just because there's no flashy dice roll visual to accompany these moments, which is certainly a missed opportunity, but also makes sense given how few and far between they are, all of which contributes to the fact it's very hard to tell what kind of person you're building John Cooper into. None of the choices are categorized in any way, you're never shown how any given option adds to any given personality trait, all of it is handled off-screen by the game. Some of the choices and their consequences are obvious. If you're an asshole who goes around stealing food from strangers, they won't talk to you anymore, and you'll miss out on whatever dialogue they had, but other options are far less clearly defined. For example, Cooper can already be friends with a couple of NPCs around the pit, like Goozer or Jimmy, depending on your prior decisions, but I have no idea what choices you need to make to trigger the pre-existing relationships. In my first playthrough, I already knew Goozer. In this recorded playthrough, I didn't, despite making more or less the same choices during the prologue. And even then, after the introductory conversation, they act like old pals anyway. I shot the landlord in the prologue, but I apparently didn't have the personality to insult Lady Death in the next scene. Furthermore, you can pick up Lucy's trail in the first act, which you'd think would make Cooper more analytical given you don't actually need to do so in order to complete that section of the game. But then in Act 2, when searching for a crime scene, he failed each and every skill check thrown at him while trying to figure out what happened. And the most frustrating thing is, I don't know if that's because of the choices I've made or the way the game is written, because there are scenes that play out in certain ways regardless of your decisions, and the railroading only gets more obvious the deeper into Let Bions Be Bygones you get. Even in the first act, which has by far the most content, your choices get a little wonky. One early lead you get is for a guy called Puck Goodfellow, who acted as Lucy's guide while in the pit. You can learn about him from Marley Savette, and then ask around the market to figure out his location, since he too is missing. Schlop and Chaba, two goons hired by the Chenky twins to watch the impaled upper cops in the market, will tell you about him, but during this playthrough I had to go back to Marley Savette and get the description from him again before they would. At another point they introduced me to Xena Chenky twice, using the same dialogue without any prompting from me, despite the fact I already knew about her from talking with the bouncers at Inferno. I even spoke to her there.
Stand still, I'm scanning. Name.
Private Investigator John Cooper.
Ah, I see.
But here in the market, Cooper acted like he'd never heard of her before.
Sorry, bro.
Who's Xena now?
Only the queen of the fucking underworld. You'd like her. She's cracked some real badass motherfuckers all by herself.
Who's Xena now?
Only the queen of the fucking underworld.
But perhaps the worst example was in Act 2, where everyone kept talking as though I was doing jobs for Victor Chenky, despite the fact in that run I never actually met him at all. There's something wrong about the way the game passes conversations and quests based on your prior choices. These were just the most obvious examples I noticed during my playthrough, but I'm certain there are others that I missed where information was repeated unintentionally, or Cooper knew things he shouldn't have, or options weren't weren't available despite meeting the requirements. You can discover clues multiple times through different NPCs, and the game will treat it like you're just finding them for the first time, or, like in the above example, force you to repeat dialogue options to progress quests. Other times, your choices just don't matter at all. As much as you bribe Chlop and Chaba with delicious savap or impress them with tales from the Big Daddy's gang war, they will never let you take a look at the impaled upper cops, nor can you ever find this guy's missing arm. The trail runs cold at a butcher in the flats, and never comes up again, despite the fact it seems like such an obvious Chekhov's gun. Or at least, I wasn't able to. Maybe if you make the right decisions, they will let you through, but without knowing literally anything about the character build I was working with, I can't say for certain. I don't understand why that aspect of the game was hidden from the player. It's the whole reason these titles have such replayability to begin with. Maybe it's because the story plays out in more or less the same way regardless of what you do. Cooper isn't so much on the case as he is along for the ride. For all the game's claims of over 1,000 important choices, very few of them have to do with the main plot. You get to choose which way you enter Inferno, you get to choose which side you take in the impasse at the end of the investigation inside, and you get to choose how you resolve the case and end the game. But those were the only meaningful decisions I noticed. And even then, only the very last of them had far-reaching consequences. Everything else was just flavor, to the point where in my first playthrough I got to the ending without even having solved the case of Lucy's disappearance because Cooper was too smooth-brained to ask the right questions. Some of the choices were obvious. I revealed the existence of the anti-tech commune underneath Inferno to Victi in one game, and after Act 2 they were never heard from again. But in a different run, where I never brought them up, it's mentioned at the start of Act 3 that there's an anti-technology revolution sweeping through the pit, even though you never get to see it. A consequence I really don't understand is why in one playthrough, after getting captured by the Chenky twins at the end of Act 1, I was met by Victi asking for help in solving a massacre they can't investigate themselves due to their augmentations. But in another playthrough I was instead met by Puck Gamer Posture who wanted help finding Lucy. This despite entering the club the same way. I have no idea what I did differently to make the change. It's also vague and oblique and janky and unfinished. Let Bions be Bygones needed more time in the oven, and it's not just the choice system, or lack thereof, that has me saying so. There are camera angles that focus on nothing. Tutorial tips eventually turn into stage directions. I even encountered 1 or 2 lines of text that literally read, quote, "To do, Cooper says something," end quote. When the game first released, it only did so with Acts 1 and 2. Act 3 and the endings had to be patched in later, and even then, they're not really fleshed out. The variety and depth and quality of the characters and locations and world building of Act 1 vanishes in Act 2, which has far fewer areas to explore and options to take. And Act 3 might as well be on rails, which is another problem because you can only save while walking around, and the game's final chapter takes place almost entirely in dialogue. If you want to try different options, you essentially have to play the whole act in one go. The way the game diminishes over the course of its 3 acts reminds me of another Cyberpunk story, Time Cop. The movie's about a cop who protects history from time-traveling criminals, and the first act is set in the 1860s, and the 1920s, and the 1990s, and the then-distant future of the 2000s. But then the third is basically restricted to a single house. It's always so disappointing to see such obvious potential squandered due to time constraints or budget limitations, or both. Underneath all the references like Xena Chenky being a blue-skinned psychopathic techno girl who wears green pigtails, or the horrible necktie, or the now absent neon signs I mentioned earlier, or this shit. There's an interesting world with an interesting story to tell. Characters and plot points are set up well in advance of when you'll actually encounter them. You don't meet Preacher until the second act, but Malt the bartender will bring him up in passing if you visit the Scray in Act 1. One of the first choices you get is to watch a news broadcast where you can learn about what happened to the upper security operatives sent to find Lucy, and you can later inform Lady Death about their fates if you so choose. You even get to visit visit them yourself and investigate their murders, like I've already mentioned. If you indulge Granny at the market, she'll tell Cooper about her daughter Rose, and searching around the pit for her makes it pretty clear that she died a while ago. But come Act 3, you actually get to meet her reanimated corpse down in the underworld, and you can even encourage her to go back up and see her mother. It's a level of attention to detail in the writing that I haven't really seen since something like the original Witcher. There was clearly a plan for Let Bions Be Bygones in terms of plot. You can see it shining through the jank, and in those moments where you catch sight of what the game could have been, it's great. I love it, but they come so rarely in its current state. Bohemian Pulp aimed high. I can't fault the ambition. I even admire the attempt, but unfortunately the end result is just cringe, which makes sense. Cyberpunk is kinda cringe anyway. It's something I always inherently knew, even as a teenager reading through the genre's seminal works like Neuromancer and Snow Crash, but it took until I played Let Bions Be Bygones for it to really click. I've found a certain affinity for cyberpunk dystopias over the last year or so, given, you know, we live in one, but that doesn't change the fact that as a genre, it's just kinda cringe. And that's okay, that doesn't mean it's bad, like what you like. But what I'm trying to say is that when a genre is so wrapped up in being the coolest thing you've ever seen as much as Cyberpunk is, it's impossible not to also be extremely cringeworthy when what's cool inevitably changes. I rewatched The Matrix recently and I had a big grin throughout that entire movie. I'd forgotten how fucking awesome that film is, but I just could not stop cringing. It's just so much, and it's responsible for so much, both good and bad, but the moment when The Matrix was cool is gone, and it's never coming back. Tears in Rain, you get it. Cyberpunk 2077 is probably the highest profile example of the genre in recent memory, and as much as CD Projekt Red have done to make up for the botched release, in a few years we're going to look back on that game and cringe, because it will no longer be the right kind of cool. Indeed, many parts of it are already pretty cringeworthy. It's just the nature of the genre. Yes, even Blade Runner. Yes, even Ghost in the Shell. Yes, even Terminator. Whatever example you're about to throw at me, yes. Yes, even that one. Because even when Cyberpunk works don't capture the exact image of coolness at the time of their release, they fall back on universal selling points of sex and violence, and Let Bions Be Bygones is no exception. The game can be incredibly horny when Lady Death is around, and you can sleep with a scantily clad cowgirl sex worker if you want, or you can pull a gun on her if you're a psychopath. Neither choice actually impacts the plot at all. They're just there because they're there. It goes back to that warped idea I've spoken about in previous videos, how sex is a mature, serious subject, so any work of fiction aiming to be seen as serious and mature will include it regardless of whether it makes sense. It's very much an immature understanding of maturity, and it matches the manic teenage energy of Cyberpunk overall. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. Sex has a place in fiction as long as it serves a narrative purpose and fits the tone. And some works of Cyberpunk are even able to pull it off, but more often they can't, because it's just something cool to throw in along with the smog-smothered skylines, and robots with faces that pop open, and huge big explosions, and huge big guns, and huge big cyberspace, and holy shit, it's so fucking awesome, I can't stop cringing. Wow! I heard once, and I forget where, sorry, that fiction for adults is about who we are, and fiction for kids and teenagers is about who we could become. But when I look at Cyberpunk as a genre, that distinction starts to blur. In most speculative fiction, in horror, in fantasy, in vanilla science fiction, in crime, people can't really change. Even if they want to, even if they try, a lot of the time genre convention will not let them. But Cyberpunk is the exception, entirely because of that manic teenage energy. Cyberpunk lets us see the best of humanity in the worst of our potential futures, and posits that change for the better is possible. It just takes a lot of effort. In Strange Days, Ray Fiennes as Larry starts off as a deadbeat sleazebag, and the first 40 minutes of that movie can be a fucking slog because of it, despite the perfect vibes. But by the film's climax, he's grown into a hero worth cheering for. The movie's not perfect. The way it frames the horrible things done to women through the reaction of men is pretty shit. But hey, that's Cyberpunk, baby! That capacity for change is why, ultimately, I don't mind the obvious marketing fluff of the claim that Let Bions Be Bygones has over 1,000 important choices. Whether or not it's actually true is immaterial. No one's ever going to sit down and count through them all. But it does speak to Cyberpunk's freedom in letting characters be whoever they want to be, whoever they could be. So, I guess, in a way, Cyberpunk's also kinda based. When it comes to character-driven RPGs, the current coolness is Disco Elysium, so it only makes sense that Let Bions Be Bygones aims so high, even if it's advertised as a point-and-click adventure game. But eventually that trend will pass, and something else will take its place, because that's just how culture works. Though I doubt we'll end up cringing at Disco Elysium the way we will at Cyberpunk 2077, because it's of a different genre. What's more relevant to Let Bions Be Bygones is that it's a mystery game. I've already spoken about so much of Disco Elysium's influence on Let Bions Be Bygones. I haven't even mentioned the similarities between the crime scenes, or the fact there's no combat, or the big tribunals that serve to play out the second act of each game, or these pre-climax boat rides, and I'm not going to. At its heart, Disco Elysium is a story about a broken man in a broken world. That world is too big for any one man to fix, but Harry Dubois can save himself if you let him. The crime at the centre of the plot and the process of solving it weren't what I got out of Disco Elysium anyway. It was how raw and real a reflection of the world and my place within it the game was that I remember most. Quite a bit of Disco Elysium is spent with the lead character not remembering his name and not wanting to. One of the things mentioned to happen during the bender that precedes the game's opening moments is him screaming, "I don't want to be this kind of animal anymore," and that hits home so hard. It hit even harder at the time I first played it in 2021, when the pandemic was at its fluctuating worst, and like Harry, I was locked in my room, unable to leave. Disco Elysium will be remembered as one of the best written works of fiction for decades to come, and rightfully so, because it's able to touch on universal experiences while also offering extremely personal ones too. No two players will approach Disco Elysium the same way, but the game will still read both like a book and provide a unique experience based upon them. It's no wonder it's inspired so many. It's an example that should be aspired to, but it's just a fact that not everyone is going to be on that level. Let Bions Be Bygones doesn't have the writing chops to pull it off, and that's not a criticism. Every work of fiction should be judged by what it is, rather than what it isn't. But it's a comparison impossible not to make when Let Bions Be Bygones keeps bringing it up on its own. At its heart, Let Bions Be Bygones is also about a broken man in a broken world, and that world is just as engaging as Disco Elysium's. The crime is just as multifaceted too, if you're actually able to pick the right choices and get the explanation behind Lucy's disappearance. But when it comes to narrative, and especially character writing, there's no contest. Let Bions Be Bygones just can't compete. Case in point, this is a story-driven game, and yet I've barely spoken about the plot this whole video. Oftentimes when I make a video on a recent release, I struggle not to overshare my thoughts and give away absolutely everything about the story. But with Let Bions Be Bygones, I just don't have anything to say. I could talk through how bonkers some of the twists were, how disappointing it was to discover how some choices were meaningless, how the first ending I got left me in tears because I was laughing so hard from the jank, I even recorded it for the sake of the video. But now that I'm sitting here writing the script, I realise I would just be recounting what happens to clown on it, rather than critique it. Because ultimately, there's not much to critique. It's a fairly generic cyberpunk noir story that hits all the beats that you'd expect, in the order you'd expect them, that just happens to take place in an amazing setting. Otherwise, I enjoyed it more for how bonkers some of the scenes could be, especially toward the end. Act 3 launched with 3 base endings, and according to patch notes, that number's now up to 5. And maybe different Cooper personality types determine what endings you can choose, but I don't know. I haven't played the game enough, and given how broken the choice system appears to be anyway, I don't feel compelled to either. I'm perfectly happy with the last second twists and bonkers anticlimax I did get. It was so sudden and so jarring, which is also very true to Cyberpunk whenever creators run out of time and money. Just look at Death Machine. That movie's only 2 hours long, but it feels like 6, and after building up to a final confrontation with the villain across the third act, it stops right as you're about to get the payoff. I actually yelled, "That's it!" when the credits rolled, and I would have done the same here in Let Bions Be Bygones if I wasn't laughing so hard. It's not the ending I expected. I'm certain it's not the ending the devs wanted me to get, but it's the ending I have, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I won't recount it. I'm not even going to critique the jank because it's self-evident, but if you want to see what I mean, I'll play it for you now. Skip to here if you want to find it for yourself.
What about life? You're not bothered by itches?
Carmen, you're alive.
I'm sorry, John, but this is bigger than any of us. We'll have time to talk later. For now, please hand over Lucy. Trust me, for old time's sake.
Touching reunion. May I have the head now?
Against my own will? I don't want to rule the world, I'd just destroy it.
That's precisely why you need more training. Detective?
This isn't right. You're doing this against her will.
Thanks.
I told you, see, this is a waste of time.
I'm sorry, John.
Well, at least we got to see the stars one last time.
Welcome back. Do you see what I mean? And it's not even the only scene in the game to be paced like this. Let Bions Be Bygones is just like that sometimes, and I love it for it. But it's also so disappointing given the potential shown elsewhere in the game. It's why I can't decide if Let Bions Be Bygones is good or bad, or so bad it's good. It might be the only game I've ever played to be all three at the same time. Despite what I said a moment ago, I do have a couple of general criticisms on the game's story. The mystery itself and the way it unfolds is actually really good, but you can fuck yourself early on by making certain choices that ensure you'll never actually learn about it. My first playthrough was so confusing because I had no idea what was going on half the time, but after learning more about the events of Lucy's disappearance in my second run, it not only fits together with the evidence really well, it's actually pretty clever. I'm pretty sure you can do the same regarding Cooper and his relationship with Carmen, which was never elaborated upon in either of my playthroughs, which is odd for how important a supporting character she is. I'm just assuming the answers are in there somewhere, because I can't comprehend their absence, and if they aren't in there, I'll be very disappointed. Some other things could have been better explained too, like Cooper's past with Zoe, and what the techies want with the sentient virus living in the blood of the Chenky twins. It's stuff you can fill in the blanks on yourself, but it's vague enough that I was still left a little confused even after 2 entire playthroughs. The story also feels very abrupt. So many new characters are introduced across Acts 2 and 3, be they entertaining like Kevin and Rose, or interesting like Preacher and the Chenky twins, but most of them only get 2 or 3 scenes before they vanish from the plot. Some of them barely get 1. A character from the first act promises to kill you at the start of the third, I think depending on what happens, but then disappears, never to be seen again. The whole game up to the beginning of Act 3 feels like the first episode of some grander story, like it's all just set up so that now we can get into the fun part of tearing it down. But then you rush into the climax and the ending without resolving much of anything aside from the mystery you were hired to investigate, which, depending on your choices, you may not have even solved. In some versions of events there are riots in the streets, but you never get to see them, never get to bring most of the character arcs from Act 1 to a close. But like I mentioned before, my biggest complaint is that for all Cooper does throughout the story, for how many choices he makes, he has very little agency over the plot. Most of the time he's just pulled along by a riptide of circumstances outside his control, and when he does become active enough to assert some influence over the plot, the consequences are always swatted aside in favour of some pre-planned sequence of events. Enter Inferno on the bottom floor or the top, ally with one side of the tribunal or the other. It doesn't matter. The only influence you have is over the inconsequential or the out of sight, and for a choice-driven, story-focused adventure game, that illusion of free will is Let Bions Be Bygones' most damning mistake. It feels rushed and incomplete, and I wish Bohemian Pulp had been given the time and money needed to finish the game they clearly wanted to make. It's still very entertaining the way it is, but when I catch glimpses of the game's true potential hidden in the world building and the atmosphere, it's hard not to realise it could have been so much more. I have rarely felt more seen by a game than by Disco Elysium. I have been Harry Dubois, locked in his room screaming, "I don't want to be this kind of animal anymore." I've been his friends and colleagues watching him ride a vodka-slick spiral of self-destruction toward an early grave. But I've also been John Cooper, stuck in a job I don't want to do, trapped in a conversation with Mally Savette that just will not fucking end. Let Bions Be Bygones might not be the next Disco Elysium, but I will remember it just as fondly because even though it didn't get everything right, what it got wrong was still very entertaining, and the stuff it did get right was great. It might not be the anguished scream of Disco Elysium, but kicking off an evening meetup with some friends by saying, "You will not believe the fucking day I've had," before launching into some crazy story is just as relatable. I joked about burning bridges with the marketing team who reached out at the start of this review to give me the code, but I am genuinely grateful that they did. I never would have played Let Bions Be Bygones if they hadn't. It's a diamond in the rough, but it deserves more love than it's got, and it makes me wonder how many other hidden gems are out there that I've never stumbled over because they didn't sell, or some algorithm decided to bury them. If any of the developers at Bohemian Pulp are watching this, please keep making stuff. Please keep trying. I want to see what you do next. And to everyone else, if Let Bions Be Bygones sounds like your kind of thing, maybe try it out for yourself. Play it with friends, you'll have a great time. It's not perfect, I'd argue it's not even finished, but it's fun, and like all the most entertaining Cyberpunk, that's all it ever needs to be. Thanks for watching.
I don't really drink flashy cocktails.
Come on, Coops. Booze is booze.
And that's the video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Share it around and let me know what you think down below. The next video is absolutely definitely going to be the 5K celebration video. If I have to delay it one more time, I'm actually going to burst. I'll see you then. Thanks again for watching.
Don't mind him, boss. His vessel is almost as ugly as this one, and his eye socket is itchy.